But if you look at it, it's mainly just a big compressor. It has, I think, a small reservoir in it, if you look in there.
It uses the water trap, I mean, also.
It has a built-in water trap. Water traps, if you don't know what those are must. This thing here takes the condensation in the air and drops it in this trap, and as long as you drain it every once in a while, you won't get air down the line. Because spitting water is annoying. It also has a valve, a pressure regulator, and a dial. I really don't change pressure very often with this airbrush, though you can. I typically spray at about 25 psi, which is generally thought of as very high. However, it's a bottom feeder that adds about 5 psi to the ones that come from the top. And it's an external mix, which means that the paint comes through here, and the air comes through here, and they mix external to the airbrush. So that adds about another 5 psi. So for those of you spraying about 15 psi with an internal mix, top loading, a WADA type airbrush, that we're about even. So I'm not super high. One thing I do like about this airbrush at 25 psi, I can run pretty thick paint. We're going to find out how thick because I forgot thinner. So I'm going to spray straight Tamiya acrylics. I may thin it with some Windex, but even when I'm really painting, either enamels or acrylics, I'm probably about 75 to 80% paint. Unless I need something ultra careful. And what that means is I get pretty good coverage on round one of it, so I don't have to paint multiple times. So I'll get pretty solid coverage each time. And that it cuts time down, and it cuts the risk of errors and pooling and puddling and all that stuff. So consider it.
Well, you're normally spraying Model Master paint.
But it doesn't matter. If I spray Tamiya, it's the same thing. I dilute it about the same. So I normally paint. I really don't care what paint I use, to be totally honest with you. I spray Tamiya. What?
What kind of model are you?
I'm a modeler who builds a lot of models. That's the kind I am. So I typically paint with Model Master or Tamiya acrylics. I do use Model Master acrylics occasionally, but they're not nearly as nice as Tamiya acrylics. And that's really, and I spray with dull coat, which is a lacquer thinner. Dull coat and gloss coat from Tesser's is lacquer based. I really don't care that much, although I will say for the base coat, I have kind of moved to using Tamiya flat black and then going to enamels for the overcoats because it's a nice way to get a bit of a color barrier. Yeah, acrylics and enamels do not mix, and so you get a little benefit with that. I go through buckets of dull coat after several steps. I'll tell you when I use it. Each model you've ever seen me build probably has 4 coats of dull coat on it, intermixed with different stages. The dull coat serves several functions. One of them that's extremely useful is it acts like a barrier. So if you're doing things like oil washes, even the simplest of oil washes, it's always nice to know you got a little layer of something other than paint or decal so that you're not going to risk something going wrong. That's why that dull coat helps tremendously. And usually, if you take dull coat, thin it about 50% with lacquer thinner, and spray it on, the thickness that goes on is so thin you'll never know the difference. So that's the basic tools for airbrushing.
You said 50-50?
For dull coat, yeah. Lacquer, only lacquer thinner. Otherwise you'll get a white look to it, which is the reaction of the wax to the enamel, to the other thinner. So always lacquer thinner. And as far as thinners go, it's Ace Hardware for me, baby. Ace Hardware, lacquer thin, whatever, clean strip it or whatever that company is, or cleans. I don't buy any of the fancy stuff for thinners. Cleanup is about half a jar. I won't do it here because it'll stink. But about a half a jar of lacquer thinner. And what you do and you'll see me do it when I clean it with Windex is you blow it backwards. You blow paint in and out, and that usually cleans it more than enough for about 20 rounds of colors. I will do several other things with an airbrush that helps a lot with speed. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I will do something called the Mega Paint, where I will line up a whole series of colors I want to paint, knowing I have different pieces, and I'll just go from light to dark, like if they're all tans and then all greens and all blacks. And depending on what colors I'm going at, sometimes you don't even need the airbrush. You just wipe the paint, pour the paint out, put the next color in, and keep going. Just blow it through and carry on. And not all the time, but there are times when you're doing a lot of different colors because there's some stowage and stuff you want to paint separately or whatever. You can get away with that in armor because the color you need is not specific, and so you can cheat. And when you do that, I've done as many as 10 colors in a row like that. The advantage of it is you're done in about a third of the time as if you try to clean it, paint it, redone it. So these are tricks about how to be quick about it. People are always saying, how can I get so many models done? Well, because I'm fundamentally not interested in slow processes. A couple more tools, and if you don't have these, you need these, and I bet you all have them anyway. You all like my Leclerc. This is not a Leclerc. This is not even a tank model. This is what we typically call a paint mule. This was a Heller LeClaire tank I built, I don't know, 12 years ago. I think it was the third piece of armor I ever made. It's a piece of crap as a kit. I did a crappy job. It was, I think, my first attempt at a full photo etch set, and as I looked at it today, I go, I did a crappy job on that. And about 7, 8 years ago, it came off the shelf entirely. I was like, all right, this thing is too ugly to even show people. And around that time, I started doing paint demonstrations. I did some at IPS Nationals, and I do a Rex demo for Henry at Brookhurst. And I needed something to demonstrate how to do the painting. And along with these two, which are just leftover hull and turret, it became nothing but a place to try out painting techniques and practice painting. And the most important thing to understand when you have a paint mule, by far, is it's not a kit. It's not a model, it's a tool. It's like a pair of tweezers, it's like an airbrush, it's like any other tool. It's a tool for you to use, and if you don't have one of these, get one of these. Go on your shelf and look for an old model that you will never ever take out again that you built. Or go into your stash and find that ancient kit from God knows who and just glue it together and use it to test stuff out. Because look, there's none of us here that love trying out new techniques on the model we just spent months building and are terrified that if we bugger it, it's going to screw up our beautiful model. All my painting techniques got tried out on stuff like this first when the risk was exceptionally low. So what if I blow it? Who cares? This thing had colors like silvers and pinks on it for a while. You know, I really cannot tell you enough how important it is to have a paint mule. Without it, you will always be worried about trying something new for fear that, oh man, I'm going to ruin my new model. I get it. I do the same thing. And if you look at some of these, like this turret here, you'll see, well, there was a salt chipping tick that went wrong because the salt never came out. Somewhere on here, some attempt I made to, so maybe it's a different part, but somewhere on one of these was an attempt I made to do some texturing work that didn't work. There's several weld lines on here that were just me practicing how to make welds that they don't exist. They're just try out. That's what this stuff's for. Who cares? It's a piece, you know, this is, so honestly, if you guys don't have one, get one. It's my #1 recommendation to you for this whole demonstration. So I'm going to try mixing just a little Windex because I normally, for Tamiya paints, I've always found their thinner works perfectly good. I know some guys absolutely swear by adding some really high quality lacquer thinner to Tamiya paint.
I use the lacquer.
That works fine too, you know.
Actually, Gunsy thinner works really well.
But I've always found the Tamiya alcohol thinner is perfectly good for their paint.
I never had a problem with it.
The other thing I want to mention is that one of the things about like this Pache kind of airbrush, super forgiving for paint. Some of the nicer airbrushes will really hate you if your paint's not right. Tamiya super fine airbrush, great airbrush, it'll gum up in a moment if you don't.
Yeah, water too.
Yeah, so there's some advantages when you don't want to deal with this too much. So I'm just gonna.
Modern high-tech airbrushes aren't meant for model paint. They're meant for guys who illustrate with ink.
Yeah,
That's a whole other ballgame.
This will spray okay. So the other thing that's worth noting about various painting and everything is that I also am not particularly careful with making sure I put only fresh paint. I mean, I don't want to have chunks, and I've actually accidentally done that. You know, I'm not trying to texture I'm not trying to get casting texture with paint, although that happens every once in a while. If that happens, by the way, you need to thin your paint. But I tend to be pretty cheap, and being cheap means I will put paint that's the wrong color. Like what you'll see, I'm going to lighten this for panel fading. I'll put it right back in the bottle. I'm too damn lazy and too cheap. Okay, so the nice thing about panel fading is it's a very easy technique. And the key thing about panel fading is you don't want to be too accurate. The more precise you are, the worse results you're going to get. And I'll demonstrate as best I can here. Anyway, so you start in the center of a panel, and you make sure the paint actually comes out. There we go. So you start in the center of the panel, and you work your way out. And as you get out, you let the feather kind of take over on the edge of the panel. And so the idea is to get the panel, the basic panel, pretty much the color you want, but make sure the edges are kind of sticking out. I'm doing the inside a little bit just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So here's a section that's a bit of a panel where I've actually kind of created a panel in the casting. Is that? Mm-hmm. Now, if you were too careful with the work, what happens is it looks like you painted it that way on purpose, And then your eyeball goes, wait a minute, why is there this black edge to my green part? And so that is part of the problem. I can't even do it because I've been doing it this way for so long, I can't even paint it that close. But just to give you an idea, what I'll try to do is see if I can make this work here. I'll paint the outside of this, and I'll try to paint one half almost solid green, and the other half I'll panel fade, and we'll see if you can see the difference. So I'm just going to, and one thing is, the speed at which I'm doing this is about the speed I would normally paint at. And so the beauty of panel fading is the most time-consuming step you'll ever make is probably the base coat of black, because and every time you add another panel to another color to the panel fade, you use less and less of the area, and so what happens is it's very fast. And again, you guys are always wondering, how the hell am I bringing so many models? Part of it is that these techniques go quick. So as you can see, I'm swallowing a big chunk of this model up in panel fading, and this is a Sherman hull if you didn't recognize it. And
Didn't recognize the turn in your amp start.
there you go. Okay, so yeah, no Sherman. There were plenty of German Shermans actually, but okay. So I'm done with half of a hull. Well, not quite. It's a little dark, so I'm missing a few sections. I apologize. Okay, what did that take me? 5 minutes? If? Can you see how it's sort of panel faded? See how the black is kind of showing through the edges a little bit?
Yeah.
Is that kind of clear? Now, just for a comparison, so what I'm doing here is I'm just painting the whole model as solid green as I can. So now if you look at it, it's hard to see in the light, but this is just solid green on this side. And it really has a bit of a monochromatic feel to it. Whereas if I go and panel fade the rest of this side of the hull, you'll kind of see what I'm talking about. And what I hope you can see, it's a little hard to describe this, the amount of accuracy involved in my work, very low. Right? I mean, I'm trying to make sure I hit the panel, but if I don't hit the middle or I go to the edge a little bit, well, that's part of the flavor, That's the nice thing about this technique, and the reason I like it so much is, as I said before, I'm not a great painter, and you really, in some ways, you pay a penalty if you're a good painter, and you try to be good at it, because it's easier to be bad at it. You get a better result. I'm not kidding, you really do. Is that all right? Can you guys kind of see that?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, so that's basic panel fading. I was actually going to paint this too, but I'm not sure it's really needed. Is there any questions related to this or anything?
How many more steps lighter do you
I'm going to go one more lighter for green. And
Why don't you
this is the
pass it
same
around
color that
first?
this model is. What?
Why don't you pass it around first?
You know what I'll do? I will do this one and pass it around, and then I'll get ready for the next one. So here's a turret. You anyone want to time it?
I try, torpedo nose.
This is a German. God, man.
And all he does is American crap.
Things like guns, if they move up and down, you do want to rotate them. Not a bad idea. Otherwise, you find out that you have whole sections that aren't painted. That's a speaking from definite experience on that one.
Will you panel fade the gun?
The barrel?
The barrel?
You bet. I'll paint the round part will stay round, so I'll paint that around it. But I'll get right up to the edges. Like if you look on this barrel, you'll see it's all panel faded. Yeah, absolutely. That helps the barrel tremendously.
You still under a minute?
Okay,
Sounds like my cat's noise.
so there's a basic Churchill turret with panel fade round number 1. Hold it on the underside and I'll send it around. You can look at it. And by the way, this tank is painted with the same colors, so you know what you can see where it's going to head to.
How do you choose a color? Do you lighten the color that you put on as the base?
Well, I, over time, have come up with colors I like. Like for olive drab, I typically use this Model Master color, olive drab A&A, whatever. You can get it. It's a normal Model Master color. So I've known that works good for olive drab, and I use the faded olive drab as a panel fade. Here I'm just going to lighten it with some white to demonstrate it. I also have a similar set of colors that I use for tans, like the more modern Army tans that the U.S. uses. That's almost always nice there's a color Model Master makes called U.S. Army Marine Corps Sand, which is the actual color that you see the tanks, and then I'll go panel fade it with a lighter sand. So you kind of have a staple of the more common colors. One color I think is great. I almost always use it as Tamiya's acrylic German dark yellow or whatever is perfectly good for German color. No, German dark yellow I think it's called.
Yeah.
Dark yellow.
For it's very good color for
60 or 61.
you know for basic German colors. You know they're
But you
fine.
could take that olive green and put white, huh?
Well, I'm doing that right now as a lighter
I'm
color.
sorry, I didn't see you.
That's going to be, when I panel fade, I almost always do 2 panel fades. One is the base color and one is the next color below that, because when I'm going over black, it's going to be a little darker and I want to get even lighter, not darker. So I'm going to do a second round. I'm going to lighten it up quite a bit.
You ever go the other way?
You can inverse panel fade, but it's a pretty rare occasion when that looks right.
And it doesn't.
So just as an idea, here's how much lighter it is compared to the actual color. Give you an idea of how much lighter I went in the second panel fade. It's pretty notably lighter. And now in the second round of panel fading,
You're just using white, excess?
yeah, I just using white. There are times when yellow is okay to do, but I found in the end run, white's probably just as good as any other thing to do.
Would yellow be for Soviet?
You know, with Soviet armor, there's a couple colors that are pretty good. There in Model Master, the one color I like tremendously for darker green tanks. Some of the U.S. tanks that look much darker, like in Korea, Vietnam, and stuff. There's another color called green drab. You see me using that on my strikers quite a bit. And then in Russian, I'll often switch to a color as for the panel fade called Russian armor green or something like that. It's kind of a medium green, and sometimes I'll lighten that a little more. So it just, here's the thing. I honestly believe that there's no right color for these things. Tanks take on so much different colors. One thing that I'll tell you that people just don't even believe me when I say this, I have pictures of a Canadian LAV-3 in Afghanistan. It's a cousin of the Striker. Painted the same color as Striker, dark green. You've seen my Striker. You'll swear if I showed you this picture, you go, well, I didn't know they painted some of these tan. They're not tan, they're just that dirty, They're just covered in so freaking much dust.
Yeah.
So you're really not going to go wrong by picking a color that looks okay to you eyeball wise, because if you feel like you have to be the exact number or something, by the time you do this and you do weathering and you account for the actual real elements in the world, you very quickly end up in a situation where you're like, I don't know what color I started with anyway. So I'm pretty flexible on it,
Hey, Jim, let me show the picture back in 2009 of 4 factory refurbished fresh Marine Corps Abrams
Yeah.
parked out at 29 Palms under the sheds, and they were 4 different shades.
I'm sure.
Taken at the same time, and those are supposedly pre-production mix, controlled spraying and everything.
Yep.
All in carb tan, and they were all 4 different shades.
Yeah, they just take a different.
Supposedly.
So for the second panel fade, there's 2 things I do slightly different. One of them is I'll close the nozzle down so the spray is a little more narrow. And the second thing I do is I try to hold the airbrush a little further back so they get a wider feather. It's almost crappy looking. But the idea is you don't want to see the demarcation in paint color. Because if you do, then your eyeball is going to think you sprayed 2 colors. What you want to see is kind of a long, and I'll pulse a little bit like I'm doing. What you want to see is just some color change in the center of the tank, center of the panels, to give you a sense that, oh, it's a little lighter than it was. See how that is? So if you can see the two greens and the black, like clearly, you're being a little too careful. And as I said, there's a real lot to be said for having painting techniques that don't require you to be careful, because that means you can be fast, and it's very hard to have a real error, because who's to say how much you want to be color-wise? So I'm just going quick, I'm just touching it. You can see I'm just very lightly airbrushing, you know, and I'm just barely hitting the panels. And let's say, oh wow, this one's a little, I'm going to go a little darker here. Whoops, oh that's good, that end's a little lighter, this is a little darker. Hey, you know what, the tanks, that's just kind of what happens to tanks, you know, the different areas got touched in a different way, and
Depends how the sun hits them.
how the sun hits them, what's been
How
on
they're
them, did somebody
how
spill
they're-
something on them, you know, did the paint not sit right, especially some of the World War II stuff, like the German stuff, where they were putting camo on with paste, and they were sending them to the field going, use this paste, and by the way, you can dilute it with pretty much anything. I never heard of anyone actually using urine, but I do know they use water, they use gasoline, you know, they use whatever the hell they could find. Did that turret make it back
Yeah,
here?
it's back behind.
Oh, there it is. So I'm going to send this around. This is about where this tank is now. There's an idea on the panel fading. Now, are there questions about how I'm doing this? Is this unclear, or does this seem like it's...
Do you go farther than 3 steps lightning, or?
Occasionally I'll put a fourth in, but usually what I do instead, Kevin, is I wait till the weathering phase and I use some tans, to be a buff, to be a deck tan, and integrate it into the weathering phase.
You're calling that the first?
Yeah.
So are you just putting this third color on the inside, or you select?
No, all on the outside. It's going oh, you mean the inside of the panels?
Panel.
Kind of. I'm not really worrying about it too much. I'm kind of letting it kind of overspray, because I'm gonna dry brush at the end of this demo. Normally, when you're done airbrushing, the next step would be dry brushing, but we're gonna let it set for a few minutes. But the dry brushing will pull all the paneling details back out, and so I'm not worrying about overspraying stuff. I'm just letting it happen.
With the
Send this
second
around
color?
this way. What?
You dry brushing with a second color then?
No. At the end of this, I'll dry brush with a whole different paint color.
Oh,
But normally I'd let it dry like overnight or something. But so what I'm going to do, having finished the panel fading, I'm going to let it dry for the 15-20 minutes so I can do something else, and then I'll come back at the end and show you dry brushing.
okay.
Yes.
So try to do this, not keep the basic shape with the dark color, and then put the light color in the middle.
The light color starts in the middle and goes out. Well, you get your basic black, let's say. Then you take your panels and you start in the middle and go out toward the edges, so just a little bit of black is showing on the edges. And then when you go to your second color, you start in the middle again, and you don't go all the way out, but you hold your airbrush. When a panel fading the first time, the airbrush is maybe 3 inches, and when a panel fading the second time, it's probably 4 to 5 to 6 inches. The width of the feather is wider, and so it just kind of fades in. The idea being you can't really tell there's more color in there at all. If you can see color edges, then you're kind of getting the wrong look, because that's not what you want. You want an idea that it's an overall green. So does that kind of make sense, what I'm talking about at this point, you guys?
Yeah.
If you're building a tank that has like a light, really light final color, like a light tan, you still start off with black.
No. I'll do tans another year, but I typically start, and this is entirely because I'm way lazy, I'll take the color that the tracks are and paint the whole model that color, so I don't have to use more than one color. That brown is great for a tan base color. Then I'll panel fade in the tan I want, like for modern Abrams and stuff, which is that U.S. Army Marine Corps tan, or for World War II German would be the dark yellow I was talking about. Then I'll go and lighten it and spray in a really lighter tan after that. So you'll see a little brownie around the edges. Black is good for, in armor terminology, all the greens, anything in brown, although not very often you see something brown, anything in gray, like all the German tanks and Panzer grays, definitely black. So, and then tank track brown, we'll call it, flat earth if you're using Tamiya, or Rossian if you're using Model Master. That's a great base color for tan, and it saves you a painting step. Okay, so now I've panel faded, right? And the next step would be to dry brush, but we're just going to assume I did that because I want to wait till this dries just a few minutes. After dry brushing, the next thing I do is I will put the decals on. Unless there's some reason not to put decals on at that point, on go the decals. I always put them on over gloss coat. I know Conrad swears You can use Solvaset on flat coat, but
Melt the shit out of it.
Yeah.
here's the argument I have against Conrad's method, and it's a simple one. If you put a decal on over flat, and your Solvaset does not melt it in, and you have a big old silver decal on there, what you gonna do? You're reasonably screwed. It's far easier to just bite the bullet, spray some gloss coat in the area where the decals are, especially in armor where there's so few decals anyway. Just put a little gloss coat on there, wait for it to dry overnight, put your decal on there, and then hit the whole model with a flat coat. That way you've covered everything and sealed it up. So you got your dry brushing sealed, your paint sealed, and your decals are sealed. You can move on to painting stuff in place. Again, I just have this paranoia about techniques that can go wrong near the end of the build. I hate that. It drives me more. I know it sounds weird, but I tell you from personal experience that that's when things start making the two-story flying tank and a few other, that's when the hammer of God comes down on them and all those things go wrong because you're pissed at the end, right? So
You spray your gloss coat again, you don't put it on with a brush?
uh,
You gotta do a little area?
for big sections like this, I would airbrush it on, yeah. But actually, what I like quite a bit for little areas, like give you an example, like the ammo can. Like, see, you have one of those little yellow stencils on a 50 cal ammo can box. Generally, a Tamiya clear is great for something like that. Just take a little brush, just paint a little gloss, maybe, and then it's good, But if I'm painting and I kind of know where all my decals are going, then I'm using an airbrush.
Future's your friend.
I never liked Future, to be honest with you. I find it wants to pool fast on me, and I don't like that.
That's true.
I just use gloss coat. To me, Tester's gloss coat. I find that
Now, it's a lacquer also, right?
right. That's a lacquer too. What I find with tanks, a lot of times where you do a hand paint is you'll be painting all your stowage, and you go, there's a decal on this or that, and you don't want to go back and second round of gloss. But your basic tank, you probably got to, your instructions or these or whatever. You kind of know where it's all got to go. So you just, good, move on. Okay, now this model represents basically what you saw me do for panel fading, dry brushing, which I'll demonstrate, and then the decals. That's all I've done to it so far. Okay, the next step is to paint all the details. And in order to not waste the entire night, I won't do all the details. I'll just demo a few. So what do we have on here that some of these things you would not normally paint in place. Let's see, what would I not normally paint in place? Certainly never paint the cooler, like I said. If anything that's going to be a bizarre color, a yellow oil drum, something like that, that's just such a bright color, don't paint that in place. And the reason is it's hard to paint like a yellow or a red or like a bright blue. Those are tough to get painted in place, because they don't want to hold the color when you try to brush paint. So those are better to airbrush and put on at the end before weathering. Other things that typically are not painted in place, there's really no reason to paint a figure in place unless you just can't access it. So this guy, for example, was just sitting as a commander in a hatch. I would normally just paint separately and glue him in. But I stuck him here just to show that you can do it should you ever want to. So other than that, what would I not paint in place? These CIP panels, like these things here, that are usually tan. If you see them on like Abrams and stuff, they're tan plastic. Those I'd probably leave off and glue on at the end. Just something that's so distinctively different that you go, But stuff I would paint in place, stowage packs, jerry cans, helmets, all this stuff that's all piled up like this, I'd definitely paint all that in place.
How about tracks?
I always paint tracks in place unless there's some reason not to. Even the workable Friol ones, lately I've been gluing those in place as well. A couple reasons I like that. One is, if you ever take them all to a show, the first thing they check, are they lined up, are they touching everywhere? So just glue them in, make sure they work. All my old tanks, the Friols are loose and they kind of do this. And after a while, they go, oh shit, this stuff's moving on. And now I glue the Friols in place, I touch them all with a little bit of super thin CA glue, and they're locked in like a brick.
I meant tracks, extra tracks.
Oh, I paint extra tracks in place, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So
if you paint something separate and it's glue on, paint on paint that you're gluing together.
almost always CA glue at that point.
Oh, we see.
Yeah. So the question is, what are we going to do for paint? What helps a lot, and there's really no way you can know this other than I'm going to tell you, is you come up with a game plan. Because one of the easiest problems when you try to do this is to just paint color and go, oh crap, I need this color. Next thing you know, you've gone back about 80 times and you're like, So it helps to have an idea of what's the best order to paint things in place. And this is the way I do it. Number one is anything that's a dark metal color, shovels, other tools, machine gun barrels, things like that. I use, the Model Master makes this product called Metalizer. I always use gunmetal for that, and it's super thin lacquer paint, which actually paints really, really well. So I start with that because I'm going to need to dry brush it with aluminum to give it a little bit of look. And I do that first because you almost always do not want to dry brush anything with aluminum that's going to be a different color, because you just can't miss it after that. So anything that's going to get painted over that, do this first. Why do I always do this first? Because there's almost always wooden tool handles, you know. So you got your shovel piece, and then you got to paint the wood, and I always want to get this done so I can paint the wood on next. So I'll do this first. The next color I almost always use after that is, this is the raw sienna, which is used for a couple things. First of all, it is touch up on the tracks typically. Secondly, it is a great base color for tow cables. Modern, old, any tow cable that's ever been used for any amount has basically got a rusty metal look to them, which is shockingly similar to tank tracks. And so you might as well just go with it. So I will use this for tow cables. So these are the first couple colors I'll hit.
What color is that, the brown?
It's called Raw Sienna by Model Master. So I'm just going to paint a few of these, and I'll come to the next set of colors after that. So I did not bring my high resolution glasses. So if this thing looks like Barney took care of painting things for you, you'll know that's just me having a little problem visually. So I'm not going to paint everything because I don't want to waste all your time. And I put like 5 times the number of tools on this thing than you need, just so I have things to practice with. And one of the reasons you want to you have extra tools in a paint demo, for example, is maybe you want to see, hey, what if I try a different metal color? What if I try a different wood color? You know, what looks good to me? So you have extra ones to practice with all the time. So here's a model. This is gunmetal, and you just dip your brush in it, and I'm just going to paint this shovel, for example. And I'm not going to really worry about making sure I get everything. I'm just going to get this section here, and I'm going to get the edges, and I'm going to run along the metal handle part, obviously, because it's metal.
You don't worry about what's underneath it.
You know, I really don't worry about what's underneath for 2 reasons. One, I try really hard to get everything the basic black color so that nothing like pops out.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the shovel with the angle sometimes,
Yeah.
you might be able to see underneath it.
You can kind of look underneath, but then you ask yourself, who's really doing that? You know, when you look at a model, you really, you know. So a lot of times, as long as there's paint, by the time you put oil washes on it and stuff, it kind of blends on out, and you've just saved yourself a pretty good chunk of time. So I'm going to paint that. I'm going to paint this, whatever this thing is here. I'm not even sure what, I think this came off of something German. The amount of accuracy in painting, say, a rod like this is really a function of 2 things that you guys have to make an individual decision on. Those 2 things are, number one, what basic color did you use? So if there's a really light color, then you have to be much more careful to get the metal. In this case, being a green, you know, the difference between the gunmetal and that is not that great. The second one is how good are your painting skills? Now, going along the top like that, I think most people can be careful and not have it go everywhere. If you've done this a lot, and this is, again, why you have a paint mule, you can attempt, and I can't even see it well enough in the dark here, you can attempt to get right along the edge like this and get along the sides. I actually hold my breath sometimes when I do this. So anyway, so you can do it along the sides, but as you'll see, it doesn't really show up that differently when you get done with all the weathering and everything, because part of what happens with the weathering is you'll get a lot of wash and stuff in these areas, and so they all kind of go away. And so you say, wow, why have I wasted so much time on all this? Okay, so as you can see, I'm painting tools at a pretty good clip right here. They're coming together fast. Up on the turret, what typically gets this color? Well, depending on your tank, there's a pretty good bet. A lot of them will have a machine gun sticking out the front. So there's the coax machine gun, so we'll get that guy for sure. Is this stuff, can you guys see this well enough and follow me? You know.
That's just the metalizer, right?
That's the metalizer getting painted. Like I said, I'm only doing a few pieces so you can just kind of see the stuff. And one thing, again, like here, this is a toughie. it's more important when you get right near the green to not hit the green than to get every bit of metal. So if you're a little short on the metal, it'll blend out over time. If you get a big on the green, then you got a little repair work. So just if you don't feel good enough with your brush, then don't go that far in. It's okay. You know, obviously big old machine guns, they need to be painted. So, you know, I'm going to get this whatever this is, an MG3 or something I stole from some kid. You know, and again, I'd probably be a little more careful with the light because I could see better what I'm getting. But, you know, now the one area that I would paint, and I forgot the flat black, so we won't be doing it in this demo, but I would paint, I mentioned that I don't often paint the rubber on the tire, but I would on a spare. Because it's not sitting in the dirt like the other ones do. So that's one thing I did want to mention. Okay, so the machine gun's painted, and
It's all the same color. There's no, I don't know machine gun well enough to know it.
no,
They're
you're
all the
right.
Same color?
No, there are areas that, and I didn't paint it. I was going to mention that the butt is typically either wood or black. The grip tends to be black. Sometimes in machine guns there are like some clear aluminum areas. If you have a great photo and a really tight hand, it's an awesome thing to do to go in there and touch it. But I'm going to come back and dry brush this in aluminum in a couple steps, and you'll see it pick out all the details, and that looks pretty good for most things.
So you don't worry about that grip then?
No, I'll go back and get the grip in black later.
Will you?
Yeah, oh yeah, I'll come back to it. One thing that you see on on vehicles quite often is a personal weapon, like these are old M16s. You know, you'll see them a lot of times laying on the top, like the commanders put one next to them. Those are a real neat little detail if you're doing details. So you just paint that, and I'll get the butt and the grip and everything in metal later. And I put this one here. This is I think a saw, which again, this is just a test case, not real. But again, having something like this is quite useful because then you can practice, you know, how to get your brush up where there's all kinds of interference. So a lot of guys don't like to pick up the model and just set it on the bench, but I always hold it. That way I can rotate the model or the brush to whichever way I can actually just get my hand in there. And over time, it's easier. I will warn you, the first few times you do this, it's awkward, and you just got to get used to it. And it's easier with a paint mule so that you're not crying if something goes bad, truly. But it's pretty straightforward stuff, right? I mean, that wasn't all that complex. Now, sometimes you look at other things and you think, most likely whatever these things are, I think they're just fold out shelves. They're probably painted the tank color. Sometimes you go, you know, I'm going to paint them a different color, and I'll show you that later. A lot of people will say, you know what, a replacement color part. You see this a lot in modern armor, like Abrams and stuff will have. I think the replacement panels for Abrams are green, so you'll see like a front fender is a solid green, and the tank's in a tan. So those things, you can make arguments for different things. Say, oh, maybe one of these is a replacement color, and I'll paint it a different color so that it just stands out a little bit. So while that's drying, I'm going to switch to my next color, which is this raw sienna, which is the tank track touch-up color and tow cable colors. So this color, as you can see, and I'm just going to touch up a section of the track so you can see what I'm talking about. You know, I'm just going to get in here with the track, and all I'm going to do is make sure not to hit the road wheels. It's less.
What color was the first color you put on the track?
There's this color.
For what?
Yeah. Well,
Earth.
it's called raw sienna, but flat earth is the Tamiya equivalent.
Yeah.
This actually might be flat earth. But again, I am touching up the tracks. As you can see, I'm picking out the details, but I can't get in there very easily because getting in there past the panels, very hard to do. So I'm just going to get as close as I can and let the weathering sort of solve most of my other problems. And normally I do this with a bigger brush, but since I'm already started with this brush, I'm going to carry on. I'll use a brush like this a lot of times. So then for tow cables, it's basically like I'm doing everything else. I'm not going to be that careful when I do it to make sure that I get every little bit, because I don't want to risk screwing up the basic paint job. So I'm just going to get what I think I can hit with the brush.
Was that a molded in cable?
No, that was some leftover that I had and glued onto the side here. Molded in parts actually work perfectly fine. They make, you know, obviously you lose detail when something's molded in. There's no hiding that. But this method picks out that detail pretty well. you know, I know Tamiya Panther, does it have molded tools? I can't remember. I know the Tiger did. The quarter scale Panther.
No, it's on the rack motors though. They're not-
Okay, so yeah, you can paint around the brackets this way. So as you can see, and I'm a little more careful when I'm doing a model for real, because I have better glasses on and I'm just trying to, you know, I can see better and everything, but it's remarkable how fast something can come together. Like, let's say these are the brackets, these dudes, so I'm just going to paint near them and leave these guys as brackets. Alright, so there's the tow cable. Like I said, I won't do all these here, just that they're on the vehicle for testing and I don't want to waste your time with this. So I'll clean that up. Then I'm usually looking at my stowage and I'm saying to myself, okay, what is the order that I want to hit this stowage in? You know, what's going to make sense? And a lot of it comes down to innermost to outermost. So I'll look at this and I'll say, well, these wood boxes would be awfully good to paint early. You know, these ammo shells down here, which are probably silver, I ought to get those because I got to get in there. And then if I accidentally get some paint, say, on this helmet, well, okay, I'll paint the helmet after the ammo. So I'm working my way to the most accessible. So from least accessible to the most accessible, and you just kind of work your way back out. Before I do that, now here's where a little experience helps, and I'll pass this on. So one of the first colors I'd want to probably paint is the wood. But I also know that I just have a bunch of tools that need to get wood handles on them, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to stop, and I'm actually going to, in a case like this, I might actually take a breath. I'm going to try doing a little bit of aluminum dry brushing. It's a little quick, typically, but for this demonstration. I'm going to dry brush the metal and aluminum so that I can go do the tool handles and then do the wood simultaneously so I don't have to go back and I don't have to waste time. And again, I bring this up only because so many of you guys comment how fast I do this. So for metal dry brushing, you just get the brush with a little glue, with a little bit on it, and you just very lightly touch the metal, and it'll come out with some aluminum on it. And usually what I do for metal is I try to look at like shovels where you're putting your foot on it, or the blade's going in the ground. You want to be a little more dry brush than a section where you wouldn't get much action, because that way it gives it a color variation. For something like this, this link cutter or whatever this is, this one I'll just try to dry brush to get the highlights of the whole piece on it. The secret with dry brushing is to not hit something you don't want to hit. So I'm being, again, I'd rather dry brush a little less than
You're not trying to be terribly
than not hit
uniform.
the paint, is
You're
what I'm
not
trying
trying
to
to be
avoid.
terribly uniform either, right?
You know, my experience with dry brushing is the more uniform you are, very much in the same vein as the more panel fading, the more accurate you are at panel fading, the less your eye likes it. Your eye sort of says, huh, that's a little too pristine. What happened there? So yeah, I get a little bit of that. So that's kind of a typical metal. Let me do some of these up here. And it looks pretty darn bright, you know, that's the thing. Right now, your model's going to start looking a little too cartoonish. You're going to be like, okay, this is way brighter than I would want. But it's going to get flat coated, it's going to get washed, it might get some little dust spray on it. It's all going to take it down from here on out. So it's a good idea to start bright and let it all work its way down. For something like a machine gun barrel like this, I'll start in the back and go forward and get the color to pop out. You don't want to go sideways because you'll get, you know, you just want to take a nice simple stretch. So there's my gun. And then something like a whole machine gun, which I would paint in place, so, you know, the 50 cals, all that stuff, I'll dry brush away. And like I say, you know, if you look at real ones, they're usually pretty dark, but they do often have a little bit of metal showing through from scrapes and bumps and everything. And it gives the gun a look of having been used a bit. What was that?
You got a slow lake?
Okay, so that's typical metal dry brushing, and I'm going to show you more technique on dry brushing at the end with the actual panel painted parts. It's easier to see it. So just for now, we'll leave it. Okay. So now I've said, okay, I'm going to go from inside to outside, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some colors for the wood. There's a couple colors I use. One of them is wood. Another one that I use is at home. Oh, here it is. is dark tan. And you can see the wood is quite a bit lighter in wood. I kind of like this color typically more for tool handles. If you look at tools, you know, like even strikers and stuff, modern day tools, they look like somebody bought them at Home Depot. I mean, and sometimes you actually see them with wood handles and red metal handles in it. And actually, somebody actually told me one time that if you lose one, my nephew was in the Army recently, and he said basically you lose one, you buy it. So what everyone does is they run over to Home Depot and buy one there because they don't want to have to pay the Army price for it. So you'll see Home Depot looking tools on these vehicles all the time. I'm going to paint both just so you can see the difference. And it's really a personal preference on what color to paint your tools. Frankly, a whole lot of stuff starts out in all green. The basic vehicles are typically all green painted tools. It's just boring. So if you don't want to have a model that looks solid green, everyone tends to go grab and paint their tools in metal and wood and everything just to get some colors going. But you know, if you don't want to deal at all, you can just paint it in wood, paint it in all green.
So Logan says in his book that World War II there was such a demand for tools. Some were green, some were just right out of the hardware store, and some of them actually painted black. He's got the
Right. I read that article.
DOD. I thought that was pretty neat because I saw so many that I just don't remember any that were out of the hardware store, but it would surprise me.
I was so surprised when I was researching modern vehicles like strikers and whatnot to see that, but that's exactly what I saw. And you can see them even operationally, you see that. So yeah, I'm painting this black, I'm painting this in wood, and I'm doing the best I can to not hit the other stowage around it, but since I'm going to be painting that stowage later, I'm not really killing myself to make sure. I am being much more careful though to not hit the paint of the vehicle, because that's the one area that's a pain in the neck to fix. If you can avoid it, try not to hit the vehicle color. So just to give you an example, this wood is not the color I would paint an ammo crate like this. It's a little light and it's a little pristine looking, because ammo crates tend to be all old wood and they're out in the elements and get kind of grown. Now this will darken a lot during the weathering, but I'm just doing it to show you since I'm gonna paint the tool handles this color.
So you have, I see some guys, kind of like the first war, airplane propellers, you know, they have a way to put
the green.
and do you have a way to do that?
You know, not only do I not have a way to do it, I've never really bothered. And I'll say this.
If you take oil paint and do a thin oil paint on it, let it sit there for a little
You
while,
have to be sober to do that, I can't do that.
Here's my thought. One
then
is,
just go over with a paintbrush, it'll leave the little lines.
you know, it's it can look a little too nice. I mean, wood propellers, yeah, for sure. The second point I'd make, and I say this about tank tracks as well, because a lot of guys go to a lot of work to weather their tank tracks all beautiful. If your tank track or your onboard tools are one of the best features of your model, you really got to work on other parts of your model. I mean, and I don't mean it negatively, I just mean it honestly. I mean, you want your model to be the paint, the finish, the presentation. You know, that's what you want to see. You don't want people looking at your tracks. I mean, tracks are buried down, you know, way in the bottom of a model and everything. So I tend to do just enough to make them look decent and move on.
Are you painting furlers now, or are you dipping them, or?
No, I paint them, same color. You know, one of the things I've learned, and this is just me, because I know a lot of guys have different feelings on this.
Yeah.
I've always felt that to a large extent, the medium, metal, plastic, glass, shouldn't really dictate the way you paint and weather something. To me, I need a tank track to look the color I want it to look based on the real vehicle. So for me, the first thing I do with friels, I just paint them.
Yeah.
Right in that
The only
same-
worry about friels is if they move a little bit,
Yeah.
then you got that big silver blob sitting there.
Well,
where the
you know
paint
what?
didn't exactly get in there.
If you get them, a lot of times when you do them on the vehicle and you lock them, you don't have to worry about that. But the other thing about that is if you're running an oil wash in them, you don't get up in there anyway, and it actually kind of looks good sometimes. Okay, so that's the wood color, and I'm going to take a second to paint these handles in wood just so you can see what I would use this for. That's bad.
Most of the guys I see, when they paint them, they just get the old Tamiya blackout.
Yep, I don't love that. I really have to be honest. I've never loved that look. I know it's personal preference, and that's okay.
But you don't have to primer the frills, metal?
Now, it's either that or they're using the rail black on them.
Black it in.
Black it in.
I really don't. I don't use any of that. I just.
No, the blue stuff. It actually chemically corrodes the.
I've just never loved the look.
It's
One of the problems I know. One point about that too is it's not controlled.
Yeah, but the problem with all that flow went away. Actually, a lot of testers paint went away.
I think they're gonna do that.
I don't know. Let's see what they do.
Oh, yeah, if you're painting enamels, you want to let the whole thing set overnight.
It might come back.
All right, so here's tools. So these are tools now. For those of you wondering, I like this color wood for tools. If I go to my garage and I look at a shovel, that wood looks about the right color to me. It's going to darken a lot with weathering, but I kind of like that as a starting point for tools. That's otherwise, I think the brown gets a little too darkened out.
That's your
So now,
wood color.
Yeah, Jim's using Model Masters, but the Vallejo acrylics are equally, if not better for brushing, I think, for hand brushing. And then they dry within an hour generally.
okay, so I'm going to paint in dark tan. I'm going to use, which is what I do, for actual crates and stuff. So this one, I'm going to paint this crate here in dark tan, so you can kind of see the difference.
What's also good for wood colors are the Vallejo flesh tones, because they come in different flesh colors.
Then you can use a good brown wash on.
Yeah, and they do it. Sometimes I'll mix those with the Model Master wood and try to brush those on there. You get a nice shine, a nice glow with it. Even if you mix a little bit of oil after it, it gives it out real quick too.
So this so now this dark tan is a color that is good for. It's actually good for wood. It works reasonably good for very worn leather. It's not a bad color. There is a color that Model Master makes called leather, which is good for that brown leather color. It's a bit bright looking, but with washes and stuff it helps. Now this is where things get interesting. So now I'm going to very carefully run my brush as best I can here on this wood piece, which is buried up in here. And all you really need to do with a brush is just be slow and precise, and try not to hit anything too major, because you'll go back and touch it later with the color it's going to be. So I'm just kind of slowly working my way through here, and I should be done in just a sec. So
Time's up.
I'm sorry, I got some bonus time from the airbrushing.
Wait one.
So, put my finger on it over here. That's not uncommon. You can just paint right over it. That's the nice thing about enamels is if you put your finger on it, you just brush right over it and it'll fix it.
Oh,
Okay, so that's dark tan, which is a color I kind of like better for crates and whatnot.
It looks like the green is showing through there. That's the way I'm seeing that.
A little bit. It's not perfectly covered, but by the time you get done with some weathering and stuff,
dry brush.
dry brushing is going to go away. So you don't have to be perfectly uniform. It's all going to blend on in a lot. You guys would be surprised. I'm ruining your image of all my models now. I know. So just to be totally candid, I'm probably doing this faster in both how fast I'm actually painting and the amount of time I'm waiting. Because it's a demo, I'd probably be a little more patient with the drying time, and stuff if I was doing it at home. Usually at home I got a few different models, so I can let it sit for half an hour, build something or whatever, or actually do something else in life. What? Yeah, you got to have a few things going at once, or else it gets a little complicated fast. So anyway,
Plus you got your out of the box projects, and you got your, oh my God, what did I get myself into project.
yep. Yeah, I try to keep projects at different stages.
Those are all mine now.
But what I will try to do though is when I decide to sit down and paint by hand, all this stuff, I'll try to hit it all in a row when I have an hour or whatever. I try not to do, because I find I'll actually line up the paint like I'm doing here, because I find if I try to remember what I was doing after several days, I get awfully confused and it seems to take forever. So it is not a bad idea at all to try to line up and get it done. Just sit down, bam, 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 as much as you can.
Do that with figures too?
Yeah, kind of. If I'm doing a bunch of figures, I'm sort of painting them simultaneously to the model, so that when I do the washes and stuff, they go on at the same time. Okay, so I thought I'd talk a little bit about some packs and stuff and what you can do for basic colors on packs. I use a number of colors. I just want to show you what those are. This is a color I use for a whole slew of stuff called, it's too dark to see, too fade out. It's called Afrika Dunkelgrau. It's a, if I were to describe it, it's a blend of tan and gray. A very gray tan washout look to it. It's the color I'm going to demonstrate for dry brushing. It's also a very good color for packs. A whole lot of packs kind of end up in this color. And Africa Khaki Brown, which is a darker version, is a very good one for packs. It's also good for canvas mantlet covers, you know, like on Russian tanks and the area on your M48 where the canvas is.
Color, faded canvas.
Okay, similar color, I think, probably to this.
Really good.
U.S. Marine Corps sand, that's the one I told you I use as the main color for Army vehicles and stuff, like modern Iraq, M1, MRAPs, things like that. This also is good for packs. This is that faded olive drab I was telling you about. If you have a light model, then you want to use maybe regular olive drab, but this is faded olive drab, so this is lighter in green than the model. What you really want to avoid, if you can, is a color that's the same color as the model, because the whole point of stowage, in my humble opinion, is to add more colors to your model. It gives your model a bit more look to it, a little wow. And your eyeball sees colors, it sees variety, it sees reality. So you don't want to sit there and go, okay, I will admit that most Army colors are basically the same color initially, but I'm going to say some are older, some are newer, some are faded. I'm just going to get a whole series of different colors that I can kind of cheat and add into my models. If you go look at that Korean tank I built, all that stowage is probably pretty similar in color, but it's all a series of these colors, so that when it's blended together, they're just slight tone differences. And that slight tone difference is what will let your eyeball see them as different pieces, different packs, different age, and it helps a lot with the overall presentation of your model. So I'm always hunting for ways to add colors to my model. I love things like these ice chests you see. You see a bunch of those plastic oil containers. They tend to be in weird colors. Anything that has a sticker on them, sometimes there's flammability stickers. I add as much as I can, justify, so that the model gets a little life to it and a little color to it. So faded olive drab is a nice color for packs. It's not the biggest variety from a green tank, so I'd only use it in a few packs. But here's what it looks like when it goes on. And eventually you're going to want to dry brush all this stuff. You got to let it dry. Obviously, got to let it dry. But then that will change the look of it quite a bit. But it comes on in this green color.
What would you dry brush it with, lighter or darker?
Always lighter.
Always lighter?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
I'm going to dry brush it lighter. The wash will darken the shadows. So I'm going to dry brush it later with this Afrika Dunkelgrau that I was just telling you about, or a lightened version of that. And I'll paint the buckles and the straps and everything. But for now, this gives you an idea of what a basic green color is. Not quite the same as the tank, right? Pretty similar. So you don't want to use it everywhere because otherwise it's all going to kind of blend in, but just different enough that your eyeball sees a different green. You guys all, that makes sense? So I'm going to just, and normally I would clean paintbrushes and everything, but I don't want to waste everyone's time. So I'm just going to wipe my brush off. This actually does work okay. And I'm going to try a couple more colors. I would normally go light to dark. So I'll start with the Africa Khaki Brown and use that on a couple packs. And then I'm going to go one or two in Marine Corps sand. So this pack I'm going to paint, let's see. So I'm going to paint this pack here, this color. And when you paint packs, one thing that's worth understanding is, are two packs touching each other? Like this pack and this pack are touching each other. So those two I'll want to have notably different colors so they don't look like one pack. But this pack, for example, and that pack are split by an ammo can, which is going to be dark green, right? So you say, oh, okay, they could be similar colors because I have a different color in between them. And that's a nice way to have an overall uniformity to your model without having a bland, uniform color in all your packs. So in other words, you're cheating your eye a little bit, saying, okay, I got light color, I got a dark color, I got a tan, I got a green, sometimes I got some black ammo, jerry cans. So it's just a nice way, all you got to do in your own mind is say, I want to have a bit of a of a mosaic look to my tank. That if I have all the same color, or too many packs the same color in the same place, it's all gonna have a generic look to it. You're gonna be like, what happened? Why is it so bland? So now I'm gonna use Army Marine Corps sand, and I'm not gonna paint it next to this one because it's gonna be a little too bright, but I will paint it over here. And you can see how these are, as I say, really not that different in colors. Even the green versus the sand is not that different. They're all in that sort of pastel, tan, green color palette. And you kind of want that because, you know, let's face it, not a lot of people are running around with some sort of a bright blue Braveheart camo scheme going, you know. So you want to have that realism of, okay, these colors are believable. What's that?
Because they're not North Face colors.
Yeah.
That's a French.
So now what you're starting to see is a buildup of different colors of similar but different hue and tone. And so it gives you just enough visual to say, this is all set, it's all a little different, and it just very slowly your eyeball will start to like that tone, I think. Again, this is just my view of the world, so you guys may not agree, but this is just, as I've gotten used to painting a lot, I've come to naturally seek out just enough color variation that nothing blends completely. Because if it blends completely, you walk away bored, in my mind. I see so many models that are beautifully finished, but for some reason, and now I can kind of identify it, the model doesn't jump out. And one of the reasons it doesn't jump out is it's too integrated. It just goes, And you look at real vehicles, and you see these photos of these Abrams and stuff in Iraq, and even though they're carrying pretty vanilla-looking stowage stuff, there's some color aspect going on, and a lot of them have a cooler, thank you, but a lot of them, you look at the baskets of them, they're all kind of the same colors, but they're all different. One of them was thrown in the dirt, one of them wasn't, one of them is 5 years old, and one of them's just got issued, that all kind of pops out. And you got to get that you do this in modeler world. This is kind of what you do to get that sort of imagery in your own mind. So this is khaki. This khaki brown is a very interesting color in that it's, in my mind, kind of a darkened version of the tans and also a taupier version of the greens. And so it's a very nice tie-in color.
Sounds like HGTV.
What's that?
Sounds like HGTV. Tie it all in.
So you can see with this one, see how it's pretty close, but not the same. It's darker than the one next to it.
What they say in art? Contrast, contrast, contrast.
And
Well, we are creating a piece of art, and we
That's correct.
do have a little bit of liberty,
That's right. I agree with
artistic
that
license.
100%.
I couldn't agree more with what Jim just said, that you are, in the end run, trying to represent a visual image of the real thing and not a engineering precision image, because you've made the enormous engineering mistake of building it 35 times smaller than it is. Once you accept that you've already made the single biggest error you're ever going to make, which is making it 35 times smaller, you might as well just say, okay, how do I fix this to look good? Now, just as a simple demonstration of how you can utilize the same colors in many different ways, I'm also going to paint this very last pack in the same color as the tank tracks. And as we head into next month's demo, you'll see how even something as unusual as the same rusty brown that was intended for a tank track or a tow cable also works fine as a potential pack color, depending on the washing and the weathering and a few other things.
So you're not even thinning that paint, you're just taking it right out of the bottle.
Definitely not thinning it for this. For brush painting, you shouldn't need to thin very often. In fact, thinning can be quite a problem because it can run on you and it may not cover. So yeah, actually good thick paint, and that's one of the reasons I like enamels quite a bit, is it's pretty thick and pretty forgiving because the drying time's high. So you have a lot of smoothing, if you want to call it, the brush. So yeah, so there's yet another variation on pack colors.
It doesn't look like the trick color.
Nope, it doesn't. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it doesn't.
So you can do other tricks if you want, and I'm not going to demonstrate it just so we can move on with the demo. Other tricks are, you'll often see some of my packs camoed. US Army has the digital camo scheme. You still see packs that are woodland scheme these days. You can see different types of woodland scheme, the deserty woodland, the non-deserty woodland, you know, the woodland, because the guys go and they get the stuff they've got, you know, and every once in a while a camoed pack can be a great little detail on a model. Camoing, which I'm not going to show you, is actually just take your brush, make your little wiggly lines, and go. You know, if you meet a guy who's a woodland camo expert and is pissed that your pack is not an exact woodland camo expert, shake his hand, tell him thank you, and move the hell on. Because he is not ever going to be happy with you. Honestly, that's the reality.